Welcome to Extreme Spreadsheets, but it's really just personal data engineering pipelines. So I'm Josh, I'm a data and machine learning engineer, and I do fancy stuff, but it's just a series of if-else statements like AI for my day job. I've actually got a new job starting next week, so a company called Intellify. I'm not sure if many of you remember Kale gave a talk here 2 years ago. I was like, yes, I love what they're doing. So they've been on my list of dream companies to work for quite a while. And they're hiring. I'm like, hell yeah, I'm getting in on that. So that's very exciting for me. But I actually had Extreme Spreadsheets as a cheeky joke in my interest section on the resume, just to make sure that people read my interests. And yes, that did come up. So they're like, tell me about Extreme Spreadsheets. I'm like, yeah, glad you asked. So here's the journey tonight. Give you a bit of an itinerary of where we're going to get to, so you can sort of like know when to wake up and whatnot. Roughly going to spend about 5 to 10 minutes on each part. I like doing question-driven talks, and given the size of this room, I'm going to have like little ad breaks to let it digest a bit, but also to have an opportunity for people to ask questions. But if you want to fall asleep, these are the main takeaways that this is my last slide, so I'll just show you now in case you want to fall asleep. So a lot of what I'm doing is on the G Suite for modeling personal things. So Google Forms is really good for basic data entry and data modeling because it'll do that validation for you. And then you can actually integrate Google Colab to all the Python goodness that you need. GSpread is the library that integrates with Google Sheets. And these 4 formulas are like the shiznit. And also Ben Collins does a really good advanced formulas course, which is free. Whilst we're here, I'm going to do a quick survey. Hands up if you know what a VLOOKUP is. Excellent, I'm in the right room. Hand up if you know what a pivot table is. Excellent. Okay. And hands up if you know of or use SQL. Good. This is going to be a great talk. Okay. I also want to motivate you, encourage you, if you will, for your personal projects. There's going to be a lot of Strange Planet comics throughout this. And although this is going to be gym related, so no discomfort, no expansion. So the first question that I'm going to try to answer is, how much does my car cost? How much does it cost to run? How this all started though, this is my wife. When we first started dating, I remember her saying to me, for a smart guy, you're not very good with your money. Savage. Brutal. So that's how we've got spouse-driven development. Joke's on her though, because we've now got spreadsheets up the wazoo. And I've got her sending me photos of her fuel receipts and odometer readings. That way I'm the OCR to go and do the character recognition of those receipts and do the data entry myself. Luckily, that's not an everyday occurrence, and I can do that once a fortnight, whatever. We only did that for her car for a year, just to get a sample for it, but it's like we still do that for my car. So yeah, every time she fills it up, babe, where's that photo? She's like, ah. So there's still missing data. That's fine. It's fine. But yeah, we're still together. That's the most important thing. Spreadsheets didn't kill the romance. So our finance data pipeline. This is kind of how we model it. Gross income, you can look up the ATO website to get all the formulas for taxes. If you don't, highly recommend it. You can learn a lot. They document everything very, very well. I've also got formulas where my tax rules, if it goes past the end of July, all my formulas just throw an error, and that's a prompt to me to go and get the latest rates. So, based off net income, we've got 3 different categories of how we model it. So we've got our basic cost of living, our disposable allowance, so depending on what lifestyle we want to lead month to month, that can vary. And then we've got mortgage over repayments and savings. So we've tried to forecast out, we want to repay our home loan in 10 years and then calculate, all right, what should we over repay to sort of hit that goal and then work backwards from there. Part of this traffic light system that we've got is also, this is our contingency plan. So last year was a very interesting year. From time to time, my wife and I are out of work just because stuff happens. So that's why it's important that we've got a good savings. So we know if either of us are out of work, we know how long we can afford to be out of work. So that's why savings is also like a bit of a safety net for us. Yeah, so that's how we model it. A lot of this is pretty easy to model. So fixed recurring expenses like your internet bill, gym, Netflix, it's like that's a fixed amount every month. So it's like, all right, well, that's going to be the same. But then there's variable recurring expenses, which happen infrequently. But then there's like a high frequency variable expenses, which were a bit harder to model and sort of like, oh, I'm not going to sort of like Google Forms every time we spend anything on groceries. So this was our strategy. Google Forms for just utilities and fuel, and groceries is the fun part where I get to Google Colab. Data model, utilities, pretty simple. It's 3 fields. I can validate that. I went through our filing cabinet of like 6 years of bills and backlogged that. So I've got a very good model for our utilities now. The Google Forms, I told you, this is ridiculous what I've done here. The fuel tracker and car expenses, that feeds into you can have multiple forms feeding into the same spreadsheet. And then it's easier to do joins on that data. So car expenses, just stuff like services, car insurance, etc. So I've got the total lifetime cost of my car. So I had a car that I recently sold off. So I've got from like 2013, I went back through all the things that I had in my filing cabinet and had the total cost of that, and only a sample of like the fuel costs. Fuel tracker, pretty simple data model where it's like date, type of fuel, actually is kind of an interesting one to model. The amount of litres, cost, and odometer reading. So that's a pretty small amount of data to enter each time, and I've got most of that if I just take a photo of my fuel receipt next to my odometer when I go and fill up, and then I can go and actually pop this in later. But this is what it looks like in the spreadsheet. So sometimes I forget to put that data in straight away, and this is where array formula really helps me out. Because on the left, I've got raw data. Every time Google Form you submit something, that first column is the timestamp that you submit it. So it's handy if I do things like timely at the right time. But then you'll notice that the first row, when I actually put the data in was like 10th of March, but then I've put in this optional date is 15th of February. So I can backdate things easy. So it's like, if I don't put it in, the default is the date that you put it in, or I can override that and backdate information to get the correct time when that happened. So this gets into the first of those formulas, array formula. Hands up if you haven't heard of it. Excellent. So this is like autofill, really. So rather than me putting in that if statement and then clicking and dragging all the way down, and every time there's new data, I'd need to drag it down again. Array formula just says, all right, give me this array, vector of data, and then just calculate it every time. So every time there's new data, it updates. So from this raw data, all these other columns are a series of array formulas, and it automatically fills out. So we're into like the software engineering territory now, where it's like we're automating a little bit this derived data and cleaning data just from array formula. So because I've got all the odometer readings, I can do the difference between them to figure out what's the distance traveled. I've got the cost and litres, so it's like, well, just figure out, well, that's the cost of the petrol, just divide it. So simple maths, but I can get a lot of value out of derived data. Then this is the query method. I think this is specific to Google Sheets. I've had to play with Excel 2016, which is a bit older. It's all I've had access to. I didn't see this here, but I've heard that you can do similar things with the latest version of Excel. But most of what I'm doing is specific to Google Sheets. So they've got this query language where you can say, here is a sheet, a worksheet, and I can write SQL. I can write SQL in Google Sheets. That's freaking awesome. So all my group by, order by, filtering, I have all that power right here. And if you notice at the very end there is a little ampersand B1. That's how you do string interpolation. To like, I want to build up a string. So B1 is a little drop down. So I've got a specific list of, I want to filter by the last 3, 10, 30 records. And then that gets put into my query, and every time that changes, it also reruns the query. So much power.
Does it understand headers? So you got headers on like row 2, so if you say do something on column B, is it going to know to start from whatever, row 5 or?
Yes, so the fuel sheet is this one here. So column D, G, and E, D, days between refuel, days between refuel. So it pulls in knowing the first row is the header to label the columns. The way the query syntax works is you have to give it the column letter, which is weird, disappointing, but here we are. I'm just grateful there's SQL in Google Sheets. So this was an awesome find. It's free. There's 30 little videos that are about 5 to 10 minutes. I think the idea is meant to be like, you drip feed it, take it easy, don't like drink it all at once, sip it. So an hour later, I smashed through all the content. It's really good. And you can also watch it at 2 times playback speed. So data science, right? Cool. Any questions so far? There's like 120 slides, so this is a pretty fast-paced talk.
Maybe you'll cover it later, but I'm interested if you found a way to avoid manual data entry and read straight from your bank. If it's a spoiler, then
Not read straight from the bank, but this is, so Angel's question was like, how do I read a little bit automatic data? There's still some manual processes, and this is why it's a personal project, because I can accept certain manual processes because it's small data and low frequency. So it's like, I can accept that cost. So what I do is every time I'm already in my banking doing my transfers, I go into our joint expenses account and export that CSV. Drop it into Google Drive. Then Google Colab kicks in. So you don't need to read specifically that, but just know that you can look up, how do I connect Google Colab to Google Drive? And there'll be a snippet that comes up on GitHub. And how do I connect Google Colab to Google Sheets? Again, there'll be a snippet, but it's that many lines of code to connect both of them, which is awesome. It'll redirect off to another page where it's like you just need to do, yes, question. This, no, but I can show you later how to get to it, how to look up the link for it. So this particular one, no. Let's, for the sake of it, Google Colab connects Google Drive. How to connect Google Colab? Think that one? That one. It's one of these. Hello, Internet. Yep, that one. That goes through the flow. So it's one of the top 3 results. You'll be able to get there. Sent. The main thing is this part in here. That's a bit tiny on that, sorry. I can use Python's OS commands because it'll mount Google Drive like it's a local file storage. So then I can do os.listdir to list all the files in that path. And then every file in that list of files, I'm doing pandas, read CSV. So for every CSV, I've now got a pandas data frame. Then pd.concat, because they're all the same schema, it's easy to just merge all of those CSVs, data frames into one data frame. Excellent. Then format the date time, and then I'll do some other cleaning after that. Also, deduplicating data was interesting because I'm the sort of person that will buy a coffee for the same amount from the same venue multiple times on the same day. So I'll have genuine duplicate transactions that I should not deduplicate. So luckily the balance actually is unique when that happens. And then if I've got multiple files where the balance is, well, it was the same one because they're duplicate transactions, I also keep the file name. So it should be deduplicated from files as well. Anyway.
So you don't have like a UID from the bank, like a unique
No.
transaction ID?
Nope.
Oh yeah, that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that does suck, not having unique IDs.
I think there's on the side, I think there's a couple of what they call neobanks.
Yes.
And they give you a REST API and a token to be able to query.
Yes, neobanks are an interesting sort of space. I am not with a neobank. So here we are in the Stone Age.
I haven't given it a go either.
And then you're meant to give it a list of lists to save the data back to Google Sheets. Happy days. So this is what it dumps in on the left. I've classified all my transactions, aggregated them by the month, and get a count of them and then the amount. But
how do you classify them?
We'll get to that, and that's a great question. AI is the teaser. So it's the query thing again to just group by, filter, and pivot and get the amount. So 783 a month, but then December last year was pretty big. March was pretty light, but then Easter it picked up again. So it's like we're all over the place with our groceries. It's one of those things where it's like it's interesting to. I'm not going to do anything different. My behavior stays the same. I'm going to just model the data and see what the data's telling me about myself. And it's like, ooh, that's a very interesting mirror to hold up. To start with, I did clustering. I used the Levenstein edit distance, where for every transaction, what's the number of characters I need to change to figure out the difference between these two bits of text. So if they're similar, like Woolworths Jesmond and Woolworths Mayfield, there's a lot of common characters. So it turns out Woolworths was a very common keyword. So as Coles Express, and bank transaction descriptions aren't particularly long, so you don't get many characters. So you get a lot of fragments of words. But chemist, pharmacy are very long words, so they wound up being their own clusters. But this gave me a good seed of what are my initial groups that I should classify by. So I used HDB scan, hierarchical density-based scan clustering, pretty good. It's good for exploratory data analysis. I could probably do a whole talk on it. In fact, if you look up HDB scan, the authors have written the Python library for it, and they give a really good half-hour lecture talk on it. Really good. I think it's only like 2017, 2018. It was like.
Yeah, I was looking at 2015.
Oh, there you go, 2015. But compared to other methods, it's pretty new. So yeah, Jellyfish is good library for doing the text comparison sort of stuff. And yeah, HDB scan to get the initial clusters. How did I do the classification though? If-then else statements really. For what I'm doing, it's like it's that low key where it's like, I've got the list of keywords per cluster group. It's like, all right, well, if the description has this keyword in it or any of these keywords, then just give it this label. And it was like 20 lines of code. So yeah, my AI is if-then else.
So I have the same problem. I just use the regex match.
Yeah. Trying to differentiate Coles from Coles Express as groceries versus fuel, that was the hardest part. But yeah. Pardon? Yeah, just get my data clean.
It's interesting though, Combank has the ability to add tags and classify your data.
Yeah, tried that. I don't like Combank's classification. It's a pain in the ass. I've tried teaching it. I have tried, and that's why we're here. Yeah, not a fan of the classification. Yeah, so yeah, Combank. I'm never going to get a job there. Here we are.
Combank could buy your system off you.
Yeah, invest in me, Combank. So, Home Gym Saga. Actually, before we get to that, are there any more questions?
Have you tried to do anything with your groceries in terms of, like, you buy a lot of chocolate, you buy a lot of frozen goods, etc.?
I specifically don't look at the receipts and the content of what we buy because that's also a very ugly mirror I don't want to look into yet. Yeah, I know roughly what's in our fridge, and it's like, just knowing how much we spend is like, it's one thing I'm trying to deal with. And that's kind of like, I could probably do a whole talk on what I consider the air gap of data pipelines, and that's where the dashboard and someone needs to make a decision. Trying to download that data into someone's head to make an effective decision is really hard because all data pipelines, what you're trying to do is change behavior. And that's where you get into a very interesting space of psychology. And that's outside the scope of the data engineer. So anyway, here we are. Yes?
I have a similar sort of question. And although you've automated a lot of it, still making purchases causes you to do work. So is that influencing the purchases that you make? Have you ever gone without dinner because you knew you'd have to punch the receipt into?
No, so it's once a month. I just get all the transactions out of CommBank. Yeah, so no, actually doing I haven't changed my behavior because it's really easy to collect the data. If it was hard to collect the data, I wouldn't do any of this project. Me and my stomach, I'm not changing that. Hence why we have the Home Gym Saga. Trying to balance out certain behaviors.
What about the insights from the exercise? Have you changed behaviour as a result? Like, do you cut spending because you have greater visibility?
I think the behavior that we change is try to earn more. It's like, all right, this is our cost of living. This is the lifestyle. We're not changing that. We just need to earn more, which is like another way of approaching the problem. But it's also, I think the main thing we've changed is try to be mindful about how much we dip into savings, because that's mostly our safety net if we're ever out of work. And that's happened to us quite a few times, actually, just through life circumstances happening and into we're relying on our savings as our income. We do have those contingency plans where we've had to drop back to our minimum mortgage repayments. We're not putting away savings, and it's like we're just doing a meager cost of living for a while. And it's like it's good to have that contingency plan in place. It was also really good when we went to get a home loan, and they're like, "Oh, can you tell us about?" Yes. Have you seen our spreadsheet? So yeah, we're just like felt good, felt grown up. All right, Home Gym Saga. I'm going to spend a bit of time on this because there's some interesting metrics, and this is where the data pipeline got pretty complex. Unfortunately for Anton, I know he wants me to go deep into the Strava stuff. That's only going to be a hot minute, and we can talk more about that at the pub. So this is where I'm trying to get to. This is my Gain Cave dashboard. So there's actually like 4 widgets in here. So we've got biggest lift, biggest volume, longest streak, and then some stats about Strava and like virtual cycling, whatnot. And activity calendar and then streak calendar. So I might touch on this a little bit. But yeah, this went nuts. And it's like I needed to tell this story because it's like it's a whole sort of ridiculousness. I need the right audience to just like dump this on. So thank you for being here. So what started this? March 24th, 2020, you were one of 2 people when gyms and pubs shut down due to COVID-19 lockdowns. You either went to Dan Murphy's or Rebel Sport. I was in the second category. This is our loot from that day. And this is what it's eventually turned into because supply chains were rubbish. That pull-up bar is galvanized pipe and galvanized shelving brackets that I've got from Bunnings. So a lot of YouTube on figure out how to make a hillbilly gym, and then a bit of timber offcuts to make the weight plate stands. I've driven all the way to Foster and as south as Woy Woy to get those weight plates from people selling them secondhand. Some D-bolt mounts to get into the wall to have those power tube bands. The squat rack, again, there were supply chain issues, and thanks to a very entrepreneurial fitter at Charlestown that decided, I'm out of work. I know how to weld stuff. People need squat racks. So him and his partner were doing 14-hour days manufacturing squat racks out of their garage. And he said in about 6 weeks, they got enough cash for a house deposit. Go him. He's also studying a law degree on top of that. So there we go. So Dumbledore. This is a ridiculous talk. I make no excuses. So biggest lift. Thank you. But yeah, that also sets the tone because some people call their home gym the pain cave. No, that's not for me. So part of this is also about what's the framing, what's the mindset, and what's the motivation for why are we doing these things? Because again, what's motivating behavior and why do you have a dashboard? I'm trying to influence behavior. So gain cave, because it's all about nourishment over punishment. I'm not trying to punish myself, I'm trying to nourish. Also, my wife's a physio and she notoriously tells me about my functional muscle mass to prevent falls later in life. So that's kind of the main thing. Happy wife, happy life. I need to build a certain amount of muscle mass so I'm not going to be like a broken hip later in life. So power to weight ratios interest me, but then also consistency. I was getting a personal trainer, but then motivation died and I wasn't particularly consistent about it. So I wanted to have metrics that help keep me accountable for trying to do it consistently. So the goal would be training more than 0. That's a good start, but I don't want to overtrain and make sure I'm having fun. It's very hard to build the am I having fun into it. I'll get there. So back on my rant about air gaps and metrics. A good metric, you're trying to optimize for something, but everything has a cost. Whether you accept it or not, you'll eventually find the cost if you overdo something. So I like the analogy that cars have accelerators and brakes for a reason, so you can self-regulate. So a good metric will also give you an indication of you need to know when to tap the brakes. So, personal trainer that I had used an app to give my online program, and the two metrics that they're trying to, I guess, gamify a bit were what's your max lift and max volume, because that actually helps with planning your program. Because like I'm not going to do like my max lift every time. Stuff's hard, it's heavy. So aim for like 75% or 80%. That's what he was doing to help me program that. If I'm feeling great, then I might push the limits of my maximum, but it's like, I'm not going to set like a world record every time I go to the gym. So it's like being realistic, like previously this was my maximum, I'm going to aim for here for training purposes. But the app was just a glorified form. These are the 4 things that I need to put in. What was the activity? How many sets, reps, and how much weight do I put in for a given lift? And that's when it turns into this with a whole series of queries later. I do mention the power to weight ratios because I think that's a fairer comparison of where I need to get. And you're saying that your maximum bench that you should look for is like 1.1 your body weight. But since I'm losing weight at the same time as I'm doing this, it's like that number is going to vary over time as well. In fact, let's go have a peek at the chart. This is what it's looked like over time. So it has been very chaotic. I've got the max and mins there for each week, and then what was the average. So it's been trending down, but I'm kind of flatlining at the moment because I'm, eating like garbage. So here we are. But this is how noisy the data is week to week. So it's like, yes, I'm doing weigh-ins daily, but I'm looking at what's my average for the week because there is just so much noise. Do not look at daily weigh-ins. In fact, do not take me for any health or fitness advice. This is just me being a spastic in my garage. So this is a ridiculous talk about spreadsheets, so do not take this as actual advice. But mostly like, don't look at the numbers. I try to ignore it. This is the glory that I try to look at. How much power am I producing? Because that's fun. Cool. So this is the data pipeline. That form feeds into workout data, and then I do some cleaning, and then I do a query from the max weight per reps, and that feeds into the dashboard. But the workout data clean. So this pipeline, I've applied a lot of functional programming sort of concepts where map, filter, group by. A lot of these functional programming concepts exist except for flat map. It just doesn't exist in Excel. I couldn't find an equivalent for it. Well, I could, but it's like that function was like 120 lines, and it's like, no. So I made my own function. So I reached out for Google script, where it's effectively JavaScript. You don't need to know the specifics of it, but just know I needed a flat map to do the next thing that I needed. So I had to learn JavaScript. Cool. So since I was doing some JavaScript, I also wrote tests for my custom function in Google Sheets. So given my input data, I run the function, and then here's the manually hand-coded results of what I was expecting. Then I used array formula to compare the two and make sure that everything comes out true. So make sure my tests are passing. So why did I want to do that? That's because when I'm doing bench press, go to the form, type in it was 1 set for 10 reps, and then this weight, submit, and then do that. It's no. I've got all that information if I just do a comma separated list of each time it was 10 reps, and then I vary the weight, just dunk, dunk, dunk. So what that does is over here, it splits it out into multiple records for me. Happy days. Or when I'm doing pull-ups, I have the same weight, but I'm doing 5 sets and I'm trying to do as many reps as possible. So the reps vary. So again, it'll expand that out for me. Do I expect you guys to do this? Hell yes. Because it's doable. I'm trying to inspire you that it can be done. So if you're running into walls with your own spreadsheets, like, oh man, this is frustrating, it can be done. Please talk to me. We can work through it. Also, Mr. Lovins, I think part of this talk is just like cluing you into some webcomics that are good value. So Strange Planet, Mr. Lovenstein, you're welcome. What is my max volume? So again, this is just one of the metrics that help with programming, what sort of exercise to do. Won't harp on this as much because it's essentially the same techniques. This is all pretty straightforward doing a query to find what's the maximum, but how do we get the second largest? Turns out there's a function called large, where if I want to find, if I did large 1, that's the same as max, but if I want the second largest in the set, or the third largest, there's 2 functions. There's large and small, so you can get, well, small, you can get the second smallest. So it's like min, but yeah, if you want to get like relative positions of things. So when I was in a data analytics team, the CEO was always like, oh, what's the relative change with things? What's the week over week and these sorts of things? So it's like, well, if I've got a new max, it's like, what was my previous one? What was my gain? How much did I beat that last one? So when I'm initially filling in the data, there's some pretty easy like gains where it's like, oh, start out low, so the bar is very low. So it's like, oh yeah, look, 125% gain. Hell yeah, I did so well with, what's it, the barbell cleans? Go me.
What's volume? What's the unit of that number?
Just kilos, add it up. So sets times reps times weight. Pardon?
Is that like if you got 10 kilos and you lifted 100 times, that adds up to 1,000 in volume?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So the idea is if I can get to, I don't know, 3 sets of 10 of a certain weight, I could also do the same thing with 10 sets of 3 reps. It depends how I want to get there. In a given set, I might not be able to do as many reps because I fatigue particularly quickly. So doing cleans and snatch in particular, because you're getting the barbell from the ground to effectively straight above you, that's a lot of movement. So you don't do as many reps of that, but it's like, how do I compare these things for total volume? That's a interesting way of trying to compare them. So it's a bit of a weird unit, but it's at least a guide for me to figure out if I'm doing, this week I'm doing 3 sets of something, or I'm doing 5 sets of something. It helps give me a guide of how much volume have I previously been able to achieve. I'm not going to plan for myself that I'm going to do more than that, and how do I dial it back just enough that I can do sustainable training without injuring myself or burning out. Index and match. Hands up if you haven't heard of that before. Keep your hand up if you want to hear about it, or I can skip over it. All right, cool. Thank you. Match is like VLOOKUP. So I'm going to look at J7, barbell deadlift, out of my volume pivot table. So B1 to 1, where this is my volume pivot table. That's just all the titles of the different types of activities. So find barbell back squat in that list. All right, well, it's column B. Cool. Index this value here is empty because index is going to give me all rows, but I've already looked up using match the column number, so that's column 2 out of this, and then that's going to give me the array. So I can use these to do array slicing and then feed other arrays into formulas. So this is sort of getting into an area where it's almost like MATLAB, where you're doing like matrix operations and not just like value at a time. You're operating on entire arrays and matrices of values. And then get the second largest out of that. Happy days. So this is this data pipeline. So worker data, the clean data, then doing some aggregations, and then I go off to the volume pivot. But the volume summary pivot is where I go and aggregate this stuff to get a bit of a text representation to sort of summarize. If I've done a variety of weights, I just kind of like average that out. So if I multiply all those numbers out, I still get what that total volume is. And it gives me a good approximation for when I did that, how many sets and reps did I do? Without having to look at all the individual records. Cool. So that's that. So yeah, Strange Planet's one of my favorite comics. Cool. Any questions so far? Still with me, or everyone's fallen asleep? I'll try to put enough memes in to keep you awake. Strava activities. This is like a hot minute sort of thing because I realized the rabbit hole that this would be, it's like it needs a talk unto itself. So this is the data pipeline. I do a ride on Zwift where it's like a virtual cycling sort of thing. That gets uploaded to Strava. I've got a Heroku instance. I was thinking of doing this as serverless, but it's like, well, Heroku's free tier is like super cheap, and when it's not being used within a certain time, it shuts itself down anyhow. When I hit it, it turns itself back on. So it's like, well, that's kind of serverless. MongoDB Atlas, there's a generous free tier. And this is the point where it's like, I need to stop because I've gone and built a web interface between Strava and Google Sheets, and it's like, I'm this far away from building a web app. So I just need to stop and give a talk on it, and then I'll go back to it. So talk to me at the pub later if you want to find out how I've done this. I'm using the internet. And cloud and whatnot. But yeah, this is in GitHub, and I can talk to you about the specific code of it. Most of it is doing OAuth integrations to actually go and access this API, pull it in, save it in Mongo. The only time this pipeline hasn't worked for me, Strava itself was down. Mine was more reliable. Cool. All right, this is the last one, so if everyone's fallen asleep, we're pretty close to pub time. Are there any questions at this point? Last sprint, cool. How consistent am I working out? This one I actually learnt when I was with a marketing analytics team, how to do this. So how do I do the sessionization of this? Even though on weekends, I want to be able to have rest days. I want to work out every weekday. Turns out working out every weekday was a bad idea because you can almost see there's the volume of weightlifting. It's kind of like goes in bursts and then dies, burst, dies. So it turns out the weeks that I do 2 weeks in a row of 5 days of weightlifting, I have a very bad third week. So it's like, that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned out of this. It's like, I can overtrain, and that's what overtraining looks like to me. So I need to balance that out with some cycling. So marketing analytics taught me this because when someone was clicking through a website, we got all the event details of someone clicked this, someone landed here and there. And then they came back later. Out of that stream of events, how do you classify this as a session and that as a session? Like, how do we figure out those heuristics of when is a big enough gap to say like this session is ended? So I have to actually get all the data together. So match, just find like the last row in all the dates for my gym dates and Strava dates. Indirect goes and takes that string and turns it into an actual Excel, Google Sheet, whatever, cell reference. So anything that you can do composition of things, you can actually do that indirection now. So we have pointers. So welcome to C++ land in Sheets. I always add the now, so today's date, because as time marches forward, if I've stopped working out, the fact that there's a now reference in there moving forward, that creates the gap to end a session for me. So the curly braces and semicolons, that's a way where you can take multiple things and just concatenate them together. So this is the unsorted data, do a query, and sort it. Also, if you take a date and minus the weekday number, you get the first day of the week. Turns out there's no like week of formula, so welcome to the land of hacks, and we get the week of calculation. Weekday, that's pretty simple, array formula, already populate that out. Go and get the text version of it. So I put the weekday number at the start, because when you do the pivot table and you want to sort them, you want the weeks to not be sorted alphabetically. The weekdays to be sorted non-alphabetically. So I'll get to that. Autocorrelate gaps. This is where you take the series of timestamps and then difference it with the one before it, which looks like this. So where there is a gap, it's saying like, all right, today's date minus the last fact I had in my fact table, that's the gap. And if that's ever above 0, that's the start of a new streak. And that's why if I have now marching forward, that'll create a new gap. So if I've got the start of a streak, I can also do some calculations to go and get the end of the streak, the difference of it, and because those streak sessions are sorted, the most recent, the current streak, is always at the end of that list, and then I can just do a max to find the maximum one, easy. Row number against each of them to go and give them a little ID, and then it's a VLOOKUP to go and match that ID back to the original dates. So I don't expect you to follow this. I'm actually recording this, so if you want to look it up later, you can. And I realize that people are kind of like tuning out now, so I saved the right spot for everyone to zone out. This is ridiculous, I realize that. I just want to show you ridiculous can be achieved. And I live for it. So that's how I've identified chunks of dates as a session. And then just a bit of conditional formatting. Because they're distinct numbers, I can auto-color distinct sessions. And just trying to keep ourselves healthy. So, where next? I could use Google Data Studio. A lot of people told me it's similar to Tableau to do really interesting data viz. But like I said, I'm probably going to move this into being an actual full-on web app, migrate the data actually into Mongo out of Google Sheets, do a static website, and then do some serverless stuff. But it's like, the main thing I wanted to show and demonstrate is like, I built a web app in Google Sheets. That is ridiculous, but it's like the power that I have to prototype something. I've got an entire workflow, and that works for me for my hobby projects. It also can be a really good way of proving out value to a stakeholder. Hey, we can like model this, like get pen and paper processes, a little bit of automation. Okay, we've got some insights already, quick and easy. So power to the spreadsheet. So the takeaways, again, if you haven't seen it, go check out this advanced formulas course. You can integrate Google Colab. I love the G Suite of just modeling stuff. More memes. My conclusions, my BMI says I'm too short. My clothes do fit better. I'm sleeping a lot better. I'm more consistent with my exercise than I've ever been. I'm kinder to myself. You don't need abs to be worthy. Thank you.